This is the full February compilation of my most disturbing apartment and late-night stories. Before we begin, tell me what time it is where you're watching from. And if you enjoy slow, realistic horror like this, consider subscribing. Now let's get into it. Forklift number 3. The first thing that bothered me was the sound of the printer. It wasn't loud. It was just that soft, mechanical whir of it warming up. A low click, then the faint drag of paper being fed through rollers. I was alone in the security office when it happened. I remember glancing at the clock above the monitor wall, 2:17 a.m. The printer only ran when the system pushed out updated equipment logs. It was automated. Forklifts, loading docks, temperature sensors in the storage bays. It printed a fresh sheet anytime something changed. Nothing should have been changing. I sat there a few seconds longer than I should have, listening to the paper slide out. The warehouse was sealed at 10 p.m., every bay locked, motion sensors armed, badge access disabled for floor workers. I didn't move right away, I just listened. The printer finished. The room went quiet again except for the hum of the HVAC system. Then I stood up and walked over. The log sheet was still warm. Time stamped 2:16:43 a.m. Dock 7. Activity recorded. Forklift ID number 3. Ignition cycle detected. Temperature bay C. Door open/closed. I read it twice before my brain really caught up. Ignition cycle. That meant the forklift had been turned on. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the camera feeds. 12 monitors. Black and white infrared. Everything looked still. Dock 7 was empty. Bay C looked closed. No movement indicators flashing. I checked the main access log. No badge scans since 9:58 p.m. No door alarms. I told myself it was a system glitch. The warehouse software was older than me. It froze up sometimes, printed duplicate logs, recorded phantom errors. But ignition cycle wasn't a common glitch. I picked up the radio and called it in to dispatch, mostly to cover myself. Control, this is Unit 3. Getting an equipment activity printout. No visual confirmation. Probably a misread. They sounded half asleep. Copy. Make a round. So I grabbed my flashlight and keys and stepped out into the main floor. The warehouse always felt different after midnight. The air cooler, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. A kind of hollow echo when you walked. My boots made a steady rhythm against the concrete. I went straight to Dock 7. The loading bay door was shut, seal intact, padlock untouched. I stood there for a minute just listening, nothing but the building settling, a faint ticking from somewhere overhead. Then I walked toward Bay C. The temperature-controlled section had heavier doors, thick insulated panels. When I pulled on the handle, it didn't budge. Locked. I shined my flashlight through the small window, rows of stacked pallets. Still, I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Probably a glitch. I did the rest of my round, slower than usual, just in case. Checked the break room, checked the maintenance hallway, even looked inside the forklift charging area. Forklift number 3 was parked where it always was. I crouched next to it. The engine casing was cool to the touch. I stood up and went back to the office. The monitors looked the same as before. Quiet, empty. I put the log sheet in the incident binder and wrote, "No visual confirmation, suspected system error." By 3 a.m., I'd almost convinced myself that's all it was. Then at 3:42 a.m., the printer started again. This time, I didn't move right away. I watched the monitors while it printed. Still nothing. When it stopped, I walked over. Forklift ID number 3. Ignition cycle detected. Forklift ID number 3. Movement recorded. Dock 7. Bay door pressure shift. Movement recorded. I felt something tighten in my chest, but not panic. More like confusion that wouldn't settle. I rewound the Dock 7 camera feed. At 3:40 a.m., the image flickered for half a second. Not a glitch exactly, just a slight shift in brightness. Then it went back to normal. No visible movement. I switched to the forklift charging station camera. Forklift number 3 was there, except it wasn't angled quite the same. I stared at the screen. When I'd checked it earlier, the forks had been lowered flat against the floor. Now they were raised slightly, just a few inches, enough to notice if you were looking for it. I zoomed in. The angle of the steering wheel looked different too, subtle, like someone had adjusted it. I leaned back slowly. No alarms had gone off, no doors opened, no motion sensors triggered. I got up again and walked back out onto the floor. This time the air felt colder. I went straight to the charging station. Forklift number 3 sat under the dim overhead light. The forks were raised, not high, just enough to slide under a pallet. I touched the metal, still cool. I walked around it. No keys in the ignition, no signs of forced entry. The charging cable hung neatly on the wall hook. I crouched down and looked at the tire tracks. The concrete floor always held faint rubber marks from daily operations. I followed the freshest set. They led away from the charging station. My throat felt dry. The tracks were darker than the others. They ran straight down the center aisle toward Dock 7. I followed them slowly. The warehouse felt too quiet. Even the HVAC seemed softer. When I reached Dock 7, I stopped. The tracks ended right in front of the bay door. They didn't turn. They didn't back up. They just stopped. I shined my flashlight across the concrete. No return tracks. I stood there a long time, staring at the floor. The door seal was still intact, the padlock still in place. I pressed my palm against the metal door. Cold. I walked back to the charging station. The forklift was gone. For a second I thought I'd lost my place, that I'd walked down the wrong aisle. But the charging cable was still hanging there, empty. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just stood there in the aisle, listening to the building. After maybe 30 seconds, I heard something faint, a low electric hum. It came from somewhere behind me. Slowly, I turned. Forklift number 3 was parked back in its spot, perfectly aligned. Forks flat on the floor. I don't remember walking back to the office. I know I did because I was sitting in the chair when the printer started again, at 4:18 a.m. I didn't look at the monitors this time. I waited until the paper stopped moving. Then I walked over. Forklift ID number 3. Ignition cycle detected. Forklift ID number 3. Movement recorded. Forklift ID number 3. Return to charge. Time stamped exactly between the moment I left the charging station and the moment I came back. I looked up at the camera feed. The forklift had not moved. The rest of the shift passed without another printout. When the morning supervisor arrived at 6 a.m., I handed him the log sheets. He skimmed them and frowned. "System bug," he said. "We've been meaning to replace it." I nodded. He walked the floor with me. Forklift number 3 started fine. No errors in the console. But when he turned the key, the hour meter blinked. An additional 0.3 hours had been added to the total. Roughly 18 minutes. Neither of us said anything about it. I finished my shift and went home. I told myself it was faulty wiring, a software glitch, something explainable. That was 3 weeks ago. They've reassigned me to day shifts since then. Budget reshuffle, they said. Last night, one of the new overnight guards texted me. He asked if the printer in the office was supposed to run by itself. I didn't answer him. He sent one more message. "Why does forklift number 3 keep logging movement when it hasn't left the charger?" I turned my phone face down on the table. I've been trying to remember something specific. When I followed those tire tracks to Dock 7, I don't remember hearing the forklift drive back. But I do remember something else. The faint electric hum didn't come from behind me. It came from directly in front of me, from the other side of the sealed dock door. And I'm still not sure which side of that door the forklift was actually on. If you enjoy slow, unsettling horror stories, consider liking the video and subscribing. The car that waited. The first time I noticed the car, I thought it was someone using the parking lot to make a call. The light over Pump 3 had been out for months. Corporate kept saying they'd fix it. It left a dark pocket at the edge of the lot. Around 12:40 a.m., I looked up from the register and saw headlights roll into that shadow. The car didn't pull up to a pump. It just stopped under the broken light. Engine running. I watched for a minute. Late-night customers sometimes sat in their cars, scrolling before coming in. After about 5 minutes, the headlights shut off. The engine kept running. That part felt unnecessary. I went back to stocking cigarettes. When I looked again, maybe 10 minutes later, the car was gone. I didn't see it leave. I told myself I must have missed it. I work alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It's quiet most nights. Truckers, the occasional insomniac, a few regulars grabbing energy drinks. The next night at 12:37 a.m., the same headlights slid into that dark space. Same slow approach, same spot under the broken light. This time I paid attention. It was a dark sedan. Maybe navy or black. Hard to tell without the overhead light. The windows were tinted. The engine idled steady. I stepped closer to the front window of the store, pretending to wipe down the counter. From inside, I could just make out the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat. They didn't move, didn't reach for a phone, didn't adjust the mirror. They just sat there. At 12:52 a.m., the headlights switched off. At 12:58 a.m., the car rolled backwards slowly and exited the lot without ever approaching a pump. I kept telling myself there were reasonable explanations. Someone waiting for a nearby business to close, a rideshare driver between calls, a couple arguing quietly. But there were patterns. The arrival time varied by only a few minutes. The duration stayed roughly 20 minutes. The engine never shut off, and they never once stepped out. By the fifth night, I started feeling the weight before it happened. I'd glance at the clock around 12:30 and feel my shoulders tighten. At 12:38 a.m., the headlights appeared again. This time, instead of staying behind the counter, I walked outside. The air was cold. The fluorescent lights over the other pumps buzzed faintly. I stopped near pump 1. The car sat under the broken light. I could see the driver more clearly from outside. A man, I think, late 30s or 40s. He was looking straight ahead. Not at me, not at the store, just straight ahead. I lifted my hand in a small wave. No response. I took a few steps closer. The engine idled evenly. I was maybe 15 feet away when the headlights clicked off. The sudden darkness made it harder to see inside. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for him to open the door. He didn't. After a minute, I went back inside. From behind the glass, I watched him. At exactly 12:59 a.m., the car reversed and left. The sixth night, I decided to write down the times. 12:36 arrival, 12:56 headlights off, 1 departure. The seventh night, I didn't look at the clock. I didn't want to give it the satisfaction of being predictable. But when the headlights washed across the front windows, I checked anyway. 12:39 a.m. That night, something shifted. The car pulled in slightly closer to the store, not near a pump, just closer. Still under the broken light, but angled differently. From the camera above the entrance, I could see the front grille more clearly. There was a small dent on the passenger side bumper. I hadn't noticed that before. I zoomed in. The windshield reflected the store lights, but I could make out his face more clearly now. He wasn't looking straight ahead anymore. He was looking at the front door, at me. I stood still behind the counter. We stayed like that for a long time, neither of us moving. At 12:58 a.m., he didn't turn off the headlights, he just kept them on. At 1:03 a.m., he was still there. That was new. My stomach felt heavy. I picked up the store phone and pretended to dial. He didn't react. At 1:07 a.m., the headlights shut off. The engine stayed on. He kept staring at the door. I realized something slowly. He wasn't waiting to come in. He was waiting for something else. I checked the security feed for the road. No other cars passing, no one walking nearby. The lot was empty except for him. At 1:12 a.m., he finally reversed. But instead of exiting toward the highway, he backed into a different spot, directly facing the front door, closer than before. The engine idled louder now. I could hear it faintly through the glass. He didn't turn off the headlights this time. They stayed on, flooding the entrance in white light. I felt exposed standing there. After about 2 minutes, he turned the wheel and left. I locked the door early that morning. The 8th night, he didn't show up at 12:40 or 12:50 or 1 o'clock. I felt relief at first. Then, at 1:17 a.m., the headlights appeared. But they didn't pull into the broken light spot. They pulled up directly in front of the store, blocking the entrance. The engine shut off immediately. The headlights stayed on. I stood frozen behind the counter. The driver's door opened. He stepped out. Average height, dark jacket, baseball cap. He didn't look at the pumps. He didn't look around the lot. He walked straight to the glass door and stopped. He stood inches from the glass, looking at me. I couldn't read his expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was something blank, like he was confirming something. After a few seconds, he reached into his jacket pocket. My chest tightened, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. He pressed it against the glass. Then he turned around, walked back to his car, and drove away. I waited several minutes before unlocking the door. The paper had tape on the back. I peeled it off carefully. It was a printed screenshot, a still image from our security camera, dated 8 nights ago, 12:41 a.m. It showed the store interior, the counter, the door, and me standing behind the register. Except in the image, I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the reflection of the cooler door, there was someone standing just inside the storage hallway. Tall, out of focus, watching me. I turned slowly and looked toward the hallway. It was empty. It has been empty every night since. The car hasn't come back, but sometimes around 12:40 a.m., I still glance at the broken light, and I can't decide which part bothers me more. The man who kept returning, or the fact that he might not have been watching me at all. He might have been watching what was standing behind me. Room 412. The first call light was already on when I walked into the closed wing. It wasn't blinking, it was steady. Room 412. That wing hasn't held patients in 5 years. They shut it down after a renovation stalled. The rooms are intact. Beds made, monitors mounted, oxygen lines capped, but nothing is active. No admissions, no charts, no staff assigned, except me. I clean it twice a week on overnight rotation. Dust settles even in sealed places. Floors still need mopping. Bathrooms still grow that faint mineral ring in the toilets if you ignore them long enough. It was 1:18 a.m. when I noticed the red glow at the end of the hallway. The rest of the corridor was dim. Only half the overhead lights are left on to save electricity. The air always feels cooler in that wing. Not cold exactly, just still. Like the vents don't push as hard. I stood there for a few seconds watching the light. It didn't flicker. Room 412. I've been here 12 years, long enough to know which systems are live and which aren't. Call buttons in that wing aren't connected to the active nurse station. They were supposed to be disconnected entirely. I told myself it was leftover wiring catching a surge. Maybe maintenance had tested something. I rolled my cart down the hall slowly. The wheels made that soft rubber sound against the tile. The red light above 412 stayed steady. When I reached the door, I listened first. Nothing. No movement. No TV hum. No oxygen hiss. I pushed the door open. The room looked like every other time I'd cleaned it. Bed made tight, curtains halfway drawn, monitor screen dark, bathroom door open. The call button rested on the bed near the pillow, its cord neatly coiled like it had been placed there on purpose. The button itself glowed red. I walked to the wall panel and pressed the reset switch. The light went out instantly. I stood there another moment waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I finished cleaning 412 and moved on. At 2:03 a.m., 409 lit up. This one blinked twice before going steady. I didn't feel afraid, just irritated. It's harder to mop when you're doubling back down the hall. Room 409 looked the same as 412, undisturbed. Dust light and even across the windowsill, no footprints on the floor. The call button lay on the bedside table instead of the bed. Glowing red, I reset it. When I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed something I hadn't before. The air felt warmer. Not much, just enough that the back of my neck felt different. I checked the thermostat on the wall near the nurse's station, 68 degrees. Same as always. I finished the wing without another light. I didn't mention it to anyone. Hospitals run on small malfunctions. If you report every glitch, you don't get anything done. The next week, I saw the red glow before I even turned into the hallway. 3 lights this time, all steady, all at once. It was 1:26 a.m. I stopped pushing the cart. The corridor looked longer than usual. Maybe it was the way the red lights spaced out evenly, like markers. I reset 405 first. The button was on the floor beside the bed. I remember that specifically because I hadn't left it there last time. I always place it back on the mattress after cleaning. The cord was stretched tighter than before. Not tangled, just extended. I reset it. Then 409. Then 412. As I stepped back into the hallway after 412, 410 lit up. I didn't hear it click on. I just saw the red glow appear. I stood still, listening. The hospital at night has its own rhythm, distant elevator chimes, a rolling gurney somewhere in another wing, a cough carried through vents. This wing had none of that, just silence. Room 410's door was closed when I reached it. I'm certain I had left it open earlier. I opened it slowly. The room felt different, not disturbed, just occupied in a way that's hard to describe. The call button wasn't on the bed. It was in the bathroom, resting on the sink counter, glowing. I stepped inside the bathroom and looked at the mirror above the sink. For a moment, I thought I saw movement behind me in the reflection, but when I turned around, the room was empty. I reset the button and left the bathroom light on as I walked out. In the hallway, I looked back. The bathroom light shut off. I hadn't touched the switch. I walked back in immediately. The switch was still flipped up. I toggled it twice. The light came back on. I left the room without looking back again. The next few shifts were quiet. No lights. I started convincing myself it had been faulty wiring. Maybe someone accidentally reconnected the system during a repair. Then one Thursday, every room from 401 to 418 lit up at the same time. All of them. A straight line of red down both sides of the hall. It was 1:11 a.m. I didn't move for a long time. The red glow reflected faintly off the polished floor. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, not fast, just noticeable. I walked to the nurse's station in that wing. The old central call panel, the one that's been dead for years, was dark. No alerts, no sound, just those individual door lights. I reset 401. Before I could reach 402, 401 lit up again. I went back inside. The call button was now tucked under the blanket, neatly, like someone had slid it there so it wouldn't fall. I pulled the blanket back. The mattress dipped slightly near the center. Not deeply, just a shallow impression. I pressed my hand against it. It felt warm. I stood there with my palm flat on the mattress longer than I meant to. The warmth faded slowly, not instantly, gradually, like something had just gotten up. I didn't reset the button this time. I walked back into the hallway. All the other rooms were still lit. I turned off the overhead lights in the corridor, one row at a time. The red glows became brighter in the darkness, more distinct, more intentional. I went to the end of the hallway and looked back. Every door was closed now. I hadn't closed them. The red lights shone above each one. I waited. One by one, starting from the far end near 418, the lights began to go dark. Not all at once, sequentially, moving toward me, like something traveling room to room. When it reached 410, it paused. The light above 410 flickered, then went dark. I didn't move. The air felt heavier. 405 went dark, then 401. The hallway was completely dark except for the faint emergency strip lighting near the floor. I realized I was standing directly outside 412. I hadn't planned to be. The door to 412 was slightly open. I know I had closed it earlier. Inside, the room was dim, but not completely dark. The bathroom light was on, casting a soft glow across the bed. The call button rested on the pillow. Not glowing, just resting there. I stepped inside. The air felt warmer than the hallway. The mattress was slightly indented again, but this time not in the center. On the side closest to the door, as if someone had been sitting upright, facing out toward the hallway. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I picked up the call button. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It felt used. I pressed it. The red light above the door lit instantly. But this time I heard something. Not from the hallway, from inside the room. A soft, steady breathing. Close. Too close. I didn't turn around immediately. I don't know why. I just stood there holding the button, listening. The breathing was slow, even, like someone asleep. Right behind me. I placed the button back on the pillow carefully. The breathing stopped. I turned around. The room was empty. The mattress was flat. The bathroom light flickered once and went out. The red light above the door remained on. I walked into the hallway. Every other door was slightly open now, just an inch. Dark inside, waiting. I haven't told anyone about this. Maintenance would check wiring. Administration would ask for reports. Someone would suggest stress. But last night, something changed. I wasn't assigned to that wing. Another janitor was. Around 1:15 a.m., I saw him come into the main break room looking pale. He asked me if the call buttons in the old wing were supposed to work. I told him they weren't. He nodded slowly. Then he asked me something else. He said, "When you reset them, do they usually stop?" I didn't answer right away. He kept talking. He said every time he turned one off, another one lit up farther down the hall, like something was moving away from him, leading him somewhere. I didn't ask where, because I already knew. He finished his shift early, said he felt sick. Tonight, I'm back on rotation. It's 1:07 a.m. The hallway is dark, all the doors are closed, and none of the call lights are on, which somehow feels worse, because now I'm the only one who hasn't pressed the button yet. Story 1. The maintenance request I never sent. At 2:14 a.m., my phone lit up on the nightstand with a soft vibration, just one buzz. I remember the time because I had been awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the bathroom fan hum through the wall. The email preview read, "Maintenance request confirmation, Unit 4B." I hadn't submitted anything. The message was brief. Bathroom mirror issue reported, technician access approved, estimated service window, tomorrow between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. I live alone. I hadn't contacted management in months. I hadn't even noticed an issue with the mirror. For a few seconds, I assumed it was a system error. The building's portal glitches sometimes. I set my phone back down and told myself I'd deal with it in the morning, but I didn't fall asleep after that. The bathroom fan had shut off earlier. I was sure of it. I always turn it off before bed. Now I could hear it again, faint, steady. Not loud, just present. I lay there listening to it until sometime after 3. By the time I checked my inbox again at 7:12 a.m., the confirmation email was still there. No follow-up, no correction. I logged into the tenant portal from my laptop. There it was, request submitted, 2:14 a.m. category, bathroom fixtures. Description: mirror instability. Access from inside is easier when they're asleep. I read that sentence 3 times. I live alone. The portal showed the request originating from my unit number. No IP address listed. No additional details. I told myself it had to be some kind of internal note. Maybe maintenance uses strange shorthand. Maybe someone copied text into the wrong field. That explanation held for about an hour. Then I walked into the bathroom. The mirror looked better. It's an old rectangular mirror glued to the wall, slightly warped at the edges. For months, there's been a faint, cloudy streak along the lower left corner where the silver backing is deteriorating. I've noticed it every morning while brushing my teeth. That streak was lighter now. Not gone. Just reduced. I stepped closer. The glass was unusually clean. No water spots, no toothpaste flecks. I hadn't cleaned it in at least a week. I opened the medicine cabinet beside it and checked behind the frame. Nothing obvious. No new screws. No cracks in the drywall. But when I reached up to turn on the bathroom light, my fingers brushed against the vent cover above the mirror. It shifted slightly under my touch. It never shifts. I grabbed a step stool from the kitchen and climbed up. The vent cover had been removed recently. I could tell because one of the screws wasn't fully tightened. It angled slightly downward instead of flush. There was a thin ring of pale dust around the edges where it had been disturbed. Drywall dust. Very fine. Almost like chalk. I climbed down slowly. The maintenance window was scheduled for later that morning, but someone had already been inside, or something had been accessed from inside. I checked the locks on my door. The deadbolt was still engaged. The chain was exactly where I leave it every night. The windows were locked. I don't have a balcony. I called the leasing office at 9:03 a.m. The woman who answered sounded distracted. "I received a maintenance confirmation last night," I said, "but I didn't submit a request." She paused. I could hear typing. "Yes, I see it here," she said. "Bathroom mirror issue. It was marked as tenant initiated." "I didn't initiate it." Another pause. "Well, the system shows it came from your resident login." "I was asleep at 2:14 a.m. She didn't respond immediately to that. "Would you like me to cancel the technician?" I thought about the vent cover, the mirror, the dust. "No," I said. "Let it stay." No one came between 10 and 12. I stayed home from work to be sure. At 12:37 p.m., I received another email. Work order completed. Completed. I hadn't heard a knock, no doorbell, no tools, no footsteps in the hallway. I checked the bathroom again. The vent screws were now tightened perfectly. Flush, symmetrical. Cleaner than the rest of the hardware, the mirror was clearer. The cloudy streak had faded further, like something had been adjusted behind it, and the room smelled faintly different. Not cleaning spray, not mildew, drywall dust. That dry mineral smell that lingers after something has been cut open. I stood there long enough for the overhead light to feel warm on my scalp. There are only two ways into my apartment: the front door and the ceiling access panel in the hallway closet that leads to the building's shared crawl space. I have never opened it. I dragged the step stool into the hallway. The panel is about 2 feet wide, painted the same beige as the ceiling. I had to push firmly to slide it aside. A fine line of white dust fell onto my shoulder when it moved. The crawl space above was dark, unfinished. Insulation, beams, wiring, and a narrow wooden plank laid across 2 joists, positioned directly above the hallway leading to my bathroom. It looked recently placed. The wood was lighter than the surrounding beams. There were faint scuff marks along it, like something had been dragged across. I stood there on the stool, looking into that narrow, dark space, feeling the air from above settle cool against my face. The plank led in the direction of the bathroom vent. I climbed down, closed the panel, locked my front door again, even though it was already locked. That night, I didn't turn off the bathroom light. At 2:14 a.m., I was awake again. This time, I wasn't looking at the ceiling. I was looking at the hallway closet door. At 2:17 a.m., I heard a soft sound above me. Not footsteps exactly, more like weight shifting slowly across wood, deliberate, controlled. It stopped after a few seconds. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I waited. The bathroom fan clicked on by itself. A low hum filled the apartment, and then through the thin wall I heard something else, a subtle vibration from the mirror, a faint, hollow tap from inside the wall cavity behind it. Not random. Measured. Once, then again. I stayed in bed until morning. At 7:02 a.m., I logged back into the maintenance portal. There was a new update added to the original request. Status: follow-up required. Note: adjustment incomplete. Resident remains unaware. My account showed as active. Logged in at 2:16 a.m. From Unit 4B. I changed my password immediately. It didn't matter. The login history refreshed a minute later. Still active. Still from my unit. And beneath the original description, beneath the line about access being easier when they're asleep, someone had added one more sentence. Mirror access optimal during fan operation. I haven't turned the fan on since, but sometimes around 2:14 a.m., I wake up to the sound of it already running. And the mirror looks a little clearer every morning. If you enjoy slow, unsettling horror stories, consider liking the video and subscribing. Story 2, The Neighbor Who Only Exists at Night. At 2:07 a.m., something hit the floor above me hard enough to flex the ceiling. Not a drop, not an accident, a controlled impact. I know the time because I had already been awake, listening to someone walk back and forth over my bedroom for the last 10 minutes. The footsteps weren't fast, they weren't angry. They were slow, even, measured, like someone counting distance. The first night I noticed it, I assumed I had loud neighbors. The second night I checked the clock. The third night I started writing down the times. 1:41 a.m., pacing starts. 1:58 a.m., water runs briefly. 2:07 a.m., something heavy settles into place. Every night, between 1:30 and 3 a.m., the unit above me came alive. During the day, it didn't exist. No shower sounds, no TV, no doors closing, no voices, just silence. I work from home 3 days a week. I'm here constantly. I would know if someone lived above me. On the 6th night, I opened the tenant portal and checked the occupancy map. Unit 4C, the apartment above mine, was listed as vacant. I emailed management the next morning. They replied within an hour. That unit has been empty for 3 months. I didn't respond, because at 1:41 a.m. the following night, the pacing started again. Only this time I left my bedroom and stood in the center of my living room. The sound wasn't muffled, it was clear. Heel, pause, shift, heel. Not random footsteps, intentional weight. At 1:58, water turned on above my kitchen. I could hear the pipes align inside the wall. It ran for maybe 15 seconds, then stopped. At 2:07, something heavy pressed down directly above where I was standing. Not a bang, more like a person lowering themselves carefully onto the floor, testing it. I didn't sleep that night. The next evening I went upstairs. The 4th floor hallway smelled stale, like unused carpet. I stood outside 4C at 1:40 a.m. The building was silent. Then I heard it, the first step. But I didn't hear it from inside 4C. I heard it above me, which wasn't possible. There's no 5th floor. The ceiling above the hallway is solid concrete. Still, I heard weight move across it. Slow, even. I knocked on 4C anyway. The pacing stopped immediately. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt attentive, like something was waiting for me to do something else. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. No airflow. No electrical hum. I tried the handle. Locked. As I turned to leave, the pacing resumed, but not above, behind me, in the hallway. I froze. There was no one there. The sound continued, moving parallel to the wall, exactly where my apartment would be below. I walked quickly to the stairwell and descended. The footsteps stayed aligned with me. When I reached my floor, they were directly overhead again. I entered my apartment at 1:56 a.m. and didn't turn on any lights. At 1:58, my kitchen faucet turned on. I saw it happen. The handle rotated slowly. Water flowed at steady pressure. It ran for about 15 seconds, then shut off. At 2:07, something lowered itself onto my bedroom floor. Not from above, inside. I didn't go in there. I stood in the hallway and listened. There was breathing, not loud, just enough to recognize the rhythm. It wasn't panicked, it wasn't rushed. It sounded like someone resting after walking a long distance. Eventually, it stopped. No door opened, no window moved, nothing left. Morning light came through the blinds around 6:30. I checked the bedroom. Nothing was overturned, nothing broken, but the carpet showed faint compression marks. A narrow path from the door to the window, and back, not straight, slightly uneven, as if whoever walked it wasn't perfectly familiar with the spacing yet. That detail bothered me more than anything. That night, I didn't wait in my bedroom. I sat at my kitchen table. At 1:41 a.m., I heard the first step. Behind me, not above, not in the hallway, inside my apartment. Slow, careful, exploratory. I didn't turn around, I just listened. The steps moved toward the bedroom, paused, then returned. The weight was heavier this time, more confident. At 2:07, something lowered itself onto the couch across from me. The cushions dipped slightly. I saw the fabric shift, but nothing was there. I could feel the air change, like someone occupying space, breathing, resting, waiting. The next morning, I checked the leasing portal again. Unit 4C still showed as vacant, but the building map had updated. My unit number was now listed twice, once on the 3rd floor, and once directly above it. I didn't contact management again, because I think I understand now. The pacing wasn't coming from above, and it wasn't random. It was measuring, learning, rehearsing, and it doesn't need the apartment upstairs anymore. Story 3. There's an apartment number that doesn't exist. At 2 a.m., the hallway motion light turned on by itself. I was standing at my door, keys in hand, about to step inside. The light wasn't near me. It was halfway down the corridor, directly between units 311 and 313. No one was there. The carpet was empty. The air was still. But the light stayed on, as if someone had just walked out of something that didn't exist. I live on the third floor of a mid-rise building with long, straight hallways and evenly spaced doors. The numbering is simple: 301 through 318, sequential, clean. Except it isn't. Across from my place is 310. To its right is 311, then 313. There's no 312. I didn't notice it at first. Most buildings skip 13, not 12. But I assumed it was a design quirk, maybe a utility closet behind the wall, maybe architectural constraints. It didn't feel important until the package arrived. It was a small brown box sitting outside my door one evening when I got home from work. The label was slightly smudged, but clear enough. Unit 312, third floor. My building's address. No name, just the number. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at it. The hallway was quiet. The overhead lights hummed softly. There is no 312. I picked up the package. It was light. No return address. I walked it down to the leasing office. The manager looked at the label, then looked at me. "That unit doesn't exist," she said a little too quickly. "I know." She held the box for a few seconds without moving, then she placed it behind the desk, out of sight. "Probably a system error," she added. "Shipping glitch. Shouldn't it return to sender?" She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, "If anything else strange happens, let us know." It wasn't what I'd asked. That night, I paid attention to the hallway more carefully. Between 311 and 313 is a blank section of wall about 6 feet wide, painted the same beige as everything else. No seams, no indentation, just uninterrupted drywall. But when I walked past it slowly, I noticed something subtle. The temperature shifted. Not dramatically, just a faint drop. Cool air brushing against my arm for half a second. I stopped and pressed my palm against the wall, colder than the rest. I knocked on it lightly. The sound echoed differently, hollow. Not like insulation behind drywall, more like space. I told myself I was imagining it. Buildings settle. HVAC ducts run behind walls. Sound travels strangely. I went inside and tried to forget it. Around 2 a.m., the hallway motion light flicked on again. I know the time because I'd been scrolling on my phone in bed, and the faint change in brightness slipped under my door. I got up, opened it slowly. The light was on directly in front of the blank wall. No footsteps, no voices, just illumination. After about 15 seconds, it turned off. The next day, I checked the building directory in the lobby. Third floor, 3103 113 134, number 312. I checked the fire evacuation map framed near the elevators. Same gap. It wasn't a printing mistake. The number simply didn't exist. That evening, my Wi-Fi signal dropped for about 10 seconds while I was sitting on my couch. The router sits near my front door. I've never had issues before. I opened the network settings on my phone. For a brief moment, just a flicker, I saw an available network. Unit 312-private. It disappeared before I could tap it. I refreshed. Nothing. I told myself it was a neighbor's hotspot glitching, but the signal strength bar had been full. 2 nights later, I woke at 1:59 a.m. for no reason. The building was quiet, no elevators moving, no doors closing. At exactly 2 a.m., I heard something in the hallway, not footsteps. A soft mechanical click, like a latch turning gently. I got out of bed before I could convince myself not to. Opened my door. The hallway light was already on, and for the first time I saw it. A line. So faint I almost missed it. an outline in the paint between 311 and 313, a vertical seam about 7 feet tall. Then another. The proportions were unmistakable, door-sized, but there was no handle, no frame, no number plate, just a suggestion of shape under the surface, like something had been painted over too many times. I stepped closer. The air felt cooler again. My phone lost signal completely. No Wi-Fi, no cellular. I reached out and touched the center of the outline. The wall felt thinner there, slightly flexible, like hollow wood beneath drywall. And then, inches from my hand, the hallway motion light flicked off. Total darkness. I didn't hear footsteps. I heard breathing. Not loud, not close enough to feel on my skin, but present. On the other side, I stepped back immediately. The light snapped back on. The outline was gone. Flat beige wall. I stood there long enough for the fluorescent hum to feel sharp in my ears. When I finally went back inside my apartment, I locked the deadbolt, and I checked my peephole. From inside, I can see most of the hallway, except the section between 311 and 313. That angle is just slightly out of view. I went to the leasing office the next morning. "There used to be a unit there, didn't there?" I asked. The manager didn't look confused. She didn't look surprised either. She just said, "No." Then she held eye contact a little too long. That night, I didn't open my door at 2 a.m. I stayed in bed. At exactly 2 o'clock, I heard it clearly this time, a door closing, soft, controlled, directly across the hallway from me, not from 311, not from 313, from the space between them, a latch settling into place. I checked the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the motion light stayed on, and every night since, at 2 a.m., I hear that same door close, measured, careful, like someone stepping out and returning to a unit that doesn't exist. I've stopped checking the wall. I've stopped looking at the directory. But sometimes when my Wi-Fi drops for a few seconds, a network flashes briefly on my screen. Unit 312-private full signal. Then gone. And I've started noticing something else. When I walk past that section of wall during the day, I instinctively shift slightly to the right, without thinking, as if making room for someone coming out. The customer who knew my schedule. I noticed the receipt printer first. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even wrong exactly. It just made a single soft click behind me at 2:17 a.m., like it had fed a line of paper through and then thought better of it. There was no one in the store. The fluorescent lights hummed the way they always did on overnights. The coffee warmers gave off that burnt, bitter smell that never really leaves the place. Outside, the highway was empty, except for the occasional semi rolling through in the distance. I was alone, leaning on the counter halfway through a podcast, when the printer made that small mechanical adjustment. I turned around and stared at it for a few seconds. Nothing printed. The register screen was blank. No transaction open. No error message. I told myself machines do that sometimes. Temperature shifts, system refresh, whatever. I reset the receipt roll just in case and went back to the counter. That was the first time I saw him. He walked in about 5 minutes later. Average height, early 40s maybe. Clean jacket. Not dressed like someone who'd been on the road long. He didn't look tired. He didn't look in a hurry either. He went straight to the back cooler and came up with a small bottle of apple juice. Not a soda, not beer. Apple juice. He placed it on the counter, already holding exact change in his hand. I remember that part clearly. $2.37. Bills folded flat. Coins already counted out in his palm. I scanned the bottle. $2.37. He didn't say anything at first. Just watched the register screen like he was waiting for confirmation. When I told him the total, he handed me the cash before I finished the sentence. I gave him his receipt. He didn't take it. He just nodded once and walked out. That was it. He came back the next night. Same time. Within 10 minutes of 2:20 a.m. Same bottle. Same exact cash. I worked Sunday through Thursday overnights, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I'd been on that shift for about 6 months. You get used to patterns. Truckers at certain times, factory guys around 4:45. The woman who bought scratch-offs every Wednesday. But this guy didn't feel like a pattern at first. He felt precise. Third night, he spoke. "Quiet tonight," he said while I scanned the juice. "It usually is," I told him. He nodded like he already knew that. He paid. Same amount. Same folded bills. When he turned to leave, he paused and said, "You take trash out around 3, right?" It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't friendly either. Just a statement. "Sometimes," I said. He nodded again. Then he left. I stood there longer than I needed to. Most regulars pick up small details. You see someone enough, you learn their routine. That's normal. But I didn't recognize him from before that week, and I definitely didn't remember telling him about the trash. The next night, he came in again. "You guys fixing the camera system?" he asked. I hadn't told anyone that. Our manager had mentioned in a group text that the DVR was being updated remotely overnight. "Why?" I asked. He glanced up toward the dome camera over the register. "Just looks different." It didn't. I felt something shift then. Not fear exactly, just awareness, like a low-grade pressure behind my eyes. "How'd you know it was being updated?" I asked. He shrugged. "Guess." He left with the apple juice. I started watching the clock after that. 2:12, 2:15, 2:18. Headlights would roll into the lot, slow, deliberate. He'd park at the far pump even though he never pumped gas. Walk in. Juice. Exact change. Minimal words. Every time he made one comment about my routine. "You eat around 1, right? Back door sticks sometimes. Cold in here tonight." Things you could guess. Maybe. Except for the trash. He mentioned it again one night. "You go out the side door now instead of the back." That was true. The back door alarm had been acting up, so I'd started using the side exit near the ice freezer. I hadn't told anyone outside the store. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask questions. I just started feeling watched in a way that didn't feel personal. It felt observational. One Wednesday, my manager called me around 1 a.m. "Hey, can you swap tomorrow? Jake wants your Thursday overnight." I didn't care. Overtime was overtime. So I worked Wednesday. Thursday night, Jake worked. Friday afternoon, I came in early to drop something off and caught Jake in the break room. "Anything weird last night?" I asked casually. "Like what?" "Just weird customers." He shook his head. "Dead all night. Didn't see anyone after midnight." That didn't sit right. "Did a guy come in around 2? Apple juice. Cash?" "Nope." I didn't say anything else. Saturday night I wasn't scheduled, but around 2:10 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the empty store, so I drove down there. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street, lights off, and watched. At 2:18 a.m., headlights pulled into the lot. Same car, dark sedan, parked near pump 6. The engine shut off. He didn't get out. The store lights were on. Jake was inside, probably scrolling on his phone. The man stayed in the car. At 2:25, he stepped out, but he didn't go to the door. He walked toward the side of the building, toward the trash enclosure. He stood there, just standing, looking at the store. Jake never came outside. No trash run, no interaction. The man remained there until 2:41. Then he got back in his car and left. I stayed parked for another 10 minutes before I drove home. The next night was my shift again. 2:20 a.m., he walked in. Same apple juice, same folded bills. "Slow night?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He looked at me for a second longer than usual. "You weren't here Thursday." It wasn't a question. "No," I said. He nodded. "Figured." "How?" I asked before I could stop myself. He held my gaze, calm, neutral. "You weren't taking the trash out." Something about the way he said it made it clear that wasn't the reason. I let the silence stretch. "You come here when I'm not working?" I asked. He didn't answer. He slid the cash forward. I didn't pick it up. "I checked," I said. "You didn't come inside." He gave the smallest smile. Not amused, just acknowledging. "I don't always need to," he said. I didn't process that right away. My brain wanted a cleaner sentence. "What does that mean?" I asked. He finally took the receipt this time, folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. Then he said, "You think I come here for you?" It wasn't mocking. It wasn't kind. It was factual. "I don't," I said. He tilted his head slightly, like I'd misunderstood something simple. "You're just the one who's here." He walked out. I didn't move for a long time. After my shift ended, I went into the office and pulled archived footage from the past month. The DVR update had finished, so everything was backed up. I checked the nights I'd been off. Sunday, Thursday, 2:15 a.m. Headlights, same car. He parked in the same spot each time. He never entered the store. He stood outside the building, sometimes near the trash, sometimes near the side door, once directly under the overhang, staring through the front windows. He stayed between 20 and 30 minutes every time, always between 2:15 and 2:45, even when I wasn't there, even when different clerks worked. He wasn't tracking my schedule. He was tracking that time, and I just happened to be the one behind the counter most of those nights. I went back further in the footage. Before I started working, overnights. Same car, same time, parked, waiting. The first timestamp I found was from 2 months before I was hired, 2:19 a.m. The store was closed for renovations that week, lights off, doors locked. He was still there, standing in the dark parking lot, looking at the building, like something inside it mattered, and it was never me. If you enjoy slow, unsettling horror stories, consider liking the video and subscribing. The car that never needed gas. The first thing I noticed was how evenly the car parked. It wasn't crooked. It wasn't rushed. It always stopped with the front tire lined up exactly with the faded yellow stripe at pump 4. Same distance from the curb, same angle. Like someone had measured it once and decided that was correct. The first night I saw it, I didn't think much about it. It was 1:53 a.m. I was halfway through my shift, leaning against the coffee station, watching the security monitor cycle through the camera feeds. The lot was mostly empty. A delivery truck had left about 20 minutes earlier. The highway beyond the station hummed low and steady, but there wasn't much traffic. The sedan pulled in without using its turn signal. Dark gray, clean, not new, not old. It rolled up to pump 4 and stopped. The engine stayed running. The driver didn't get out. That happens sometimes. People check their phones. They finish a call. They sit and think. Overnight shifts are full of people who don't want to go home yet. I gave it a few minutes. 5, 10. At 15 minutes, I checked the pump status on the register screen. Pump 4 showed idle. No card inserted, no transaction started. The car stayed there for 23 minutes. I remember that number because I checked the clock twice. At 2:16 a.m., the brake lights flared briefly, and the car pulled away. No gas pumped. No one came inside. I forgot about it until the next night, 1:52 a.m. Headlights turned into the lot. Same sedan, same pump, same careful alignment. This time I watched from the front window instead of the camera monitor. The windshield was tinted just dark enough that I couldn't see the driver clearly. I could make out the shape of someone sitting upright, hands low, probably resting near the steering wheel. No movement beyond that. 20 minutes passed. Then the car left at 2:15 a.m. Exactly. By the fourth night, I started writing the time down on a receipt and keeping it in my pocket. 1:51 arrival, 2:14 departure. It varied by a minute or two, but it was always around 20 minutes. Always pump 4. They never stepped out, never opened a window, never turned on interior lights. It felt less like someone hesitating and more like someone completing a task. I told my coworker about it during a shift change. "Probably waiting on someone," she said. "Drug deal or something." "Then why not park in the back?" I asked. She shrugged. "People are weird." That was reasonable. Still, I started paying attention to pump 4 more than the others. On the 6th night, while the sedan was sitting there, I glanced down at the register screen out of habit. Pump 4 showed active. I frowned. There was no card authorization beep. I hadn't approved anything. No one had lifted the nozzle. The display read $18.47. It climbed. $21.03. $24.10. My first thought was a glitch. I tapped into the pump control screen. It showed fuel dispensing, but the live camera feed clearly showed the hose still hanging in its cradle. No movement, no one outside the car. The numbers kept rising, $31.78. I felt heat creep into my face, not panic exactly, just confusion that didn't fit into anything logical. I stepped outside. The air was cold and dry. It was quiet enough that I could hear the faint electrical hum from the canopy lights. The car engine idled steadily. I walked toward pump 4 slowly, not wanting to look confrontational. The digital display on the pump read $0.00. The screen inside said $38.12. I stopped about 6 feet from the driver's window. I couldn't see the person clearly, just the outline of a head facing forward. The fuel hose hadn't moved. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. The numbers inside stopped climbing at $42.63. The car's brake lights came on. The sedan pulled away smoothly and exited the lot. I went back inside and stared at the register screen. The transaction was still open. No payment method attached, no card number. Just a completed fuel amount, $42.63. I voided it, assuming it was some kind of system error. We'd had stranger glitches before. The next night it happened again. Arrival, 1:53 a.m., car parked, driver still. At 2:02 a.m., pump 4 showed active. This time I didn't go outside. I stayed behind the counter and watched the numbers climb. $12.09, $27.44, $56.02. The hose never moved. When the car left at 2:17, the total stopped at $63.88. I didn't void it right away. I printed the pump log instead. The log showed pump 4 dispensing fuel at normal flow rate for 15 minutes, but there was no record of nozzle lift, no card swipe, no cash prepay, just fuel flowing. My manager came in around 6:30 a.m. I showed him the logs. He looked annoyed more than concerned. "Probably a sensor issue," he said. "These pumps are old." "But there's no missing fuel," I said. "The tank levels didn't drop that much." He gave me a look like I was overthinking it. "Inventory's off all the time by a few gallons. Don't stress." That should have ended it. But over the next 2 weeks, pump 4 dispensed fuel every single night between 2 and 2:20 a.m. The totals varied. Some nights $25, some nights over $100. The cumulative amount crossed $3,000 by the end of the month. There was no corresponding inventory shortage. That was the part that kept me up during the day. If fuel was actually being pumped, it had to go somewhere. But the underground tank readings were stable within normal variance. It was like the system believed fuel was moving. But nothing physical changed. One night I decided to test something. At 1:45 a.m., before the sedan arrived, I disabled Pump 4 from the control panel. Fully offline. The screen confirmed, out of service. At 1:52, the sedan pulled in. It parked at Pump 4 anyway. I watched the driver's silhouette through the window. They didn't react to the out of service sign. At 2:03 a.m., the register screen beeped softly. Pump 4, active. I stared at the screen. It should have been impossible. The pump outside still displayed out of service in red letters, but inside the dollar amount started rising. $9.14, $19.52. I felt something shift in my chest then. Not fear, not exactly. More like understanding that I wasn't looking at a mechanical issue. I walked outside again. The night felt heavier than usual. No wind, no highway noise for a stretch of seconds that felt too long. The pump display still showed out of service. The hose hadn't moved. The car idled. I stepped closer than before, close enough to see faint reflections in the tinted glass. For a second, I thought I saw someone in the passenger seat too. Not moving, just shapes. The total inside reached $78.33. The car's engine revved slightly. Then it drove away. The pump inside stopped counting at $80 exactly. That was the only round number I'd seen. I didn't void the transaction. I left it open. The next morning, corporate called. They wanted to know why Pump 4 had dispensed over $5,000 in the last 6 weeks without payment records. I didn't have an answer. They pulled the surveillance remotely. Later that afternoon, my manager called me. His voice was different. Corporate says the footage shows the hose extended each night, he said. It's not, I told him. I was standing there. They're saying it is. Every night. Hose out. Fueling. That's not true. There was a long pause. They're sending someone to inspect. The inspector came 2 days later during my shift. We stood outside at 1:50 a.m., waiting. When the sedan pulled in, he folded his arms. Watch, he said. We both looked at Pump 4. The driver stayed inside. The hose did not move. At 2:04 a.m., the register inside beeped. I didn't take my eyes off the pump. The inspector leaned forward slightly. You see that? He asked quietly. I did. The hose hadn't lifted, but the fuel meter on the pump face, normally dark until activation, glowed faintly. The numbers weren't visible, just the backlight, as if something had triggered it from inside. We went back in to check the register. $14.77, climbing. The inspector didn't say anything for a while. At 2:18 a.m., the car left. The total stopped at $92.11. He checked the underground tank monitor. Levels unchanged. He looked at me differently after that. Not suspicious, not skeptical, just unsettled. Before he left, he said something I still think about. The system thinks it's pumping, he said, but nothing here is losing fuel. Then what is? I asked. He didn't answer. The sedan still comes some nights, not every night anymore. Always Pump 4, always around 2 in the morning. I stopped checking the totals after a while. Last week, I looked at the cumulative report out of habit. Pump 4 has dispensed over $18,000 in fuel this year. Inventory still balances. Nothing missing. Sometimes when the lot is quiet and the car is sitting there, I stand by the window and try to see through the tint. I don't focus on the driver anymore. I watch the space around the car, because whatever is being fueled doesn't seem connected to the pump, and it doesn't seem to need the hose. The man in the back hallway. The first time I heard the stockroom door open, I thought it was the air pressure shifting. It was a soft sound, not a bang, just the slow release of a latch and the quiet drag of metal over tile. I was restocking cigarettes behind the counter at 2:37 a.m. The store was empty. The soda coolers hummed. The overhead lights made everything look flatter than it should. I remember thinking the air felt colder than usual, like the heat had dipped for a second. The stockroom door was in the back hallway near the employee restroom. No one had access to it but me and the manager. It stayed locked automatically. Heavy door, industrial handle. I stood still and listened. Nothing followed the sound. No footsteps, no boxes shifting, no second latch. I walked down the hallway slowly, not in a rush. The tile felt louder under my shoes than it normally did. The door was closed. The handle was still. I tested it. Locked. I told myself it was the building settling. These places make noise at night. Ductwork expands. Ice machines click. You learn to filter it out. But I noticed it again the next night. Same time, within a few minutes of 2:30. The latch sound. Then silence. This time I didn't go back there right away. I stood behind the counter and counted to 30. Nothing else. When I checked the hallway, the door was shut and locked again. I mentioned it to my manager the next morning. He didn't look concerned. Probably the seal sticking, he said. No one's got access besides us. There's no alarm trigger, I said. If it was open, we'd know. That made sense. Still, I started watching the hallway camera more closely during my shift. The camera angle wasn't great. It caught the hallway from above, slightly off-center. You could see the stockroom door, but not the entire frame. 3 nights later, at 2:34 a.m., I was watching the monitor when the door handle moved. Just slightly. Not enough to swing open, just enough to shift. I leaned closer to the screen. The latch depressed slowly, like someone turning it carefully. Then the door opened inward about 6 inches. I felt my body go very still. No one stepped out. The opening stayed there for maybe 4 seconds. Then it closed. The handle returned to its resting position. I walked back immediately, heart steady but tight. The hallway felt longer than usual. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. When I reached the door, it was shut, locked. I unlocked it with my key. The stockroom was exactly as I'd left it. Shelves, cleaning supplies, boxes of cups. No one inside. No second exit. No ceiling access. No space big enough to hide in without moving something. I checked inventory the next morning. Nothing missing. For a week, the door didn't move again. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the handle shift. Then, at 2:29 a.m. on a Tuesday, I heard it clearly behind me while I was counting the drawer. The slow pull of the door opening. I didn't turn around immediately. I waited. I listened. There was a soft step. Not loud, not hurried, just 1 foot on tile. Then, nothing. I walked down the hallway slower this time. The door was open about a foot. The lights inside the stockroom were off. I stood there for a second before switching them on. The room was empty, but the air felt different, slightly warmer than the hallway. I don't know how else to describe it. Not hot, just occupied. I locked it again and went back to the counter. That was when I decided to put my own camera up. Nothing official, just a small motion camera I ordered online. I mounted it in the corner of the hallway above eye level, angled directly at the stockroom door. I didn't tell my manager. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. On the 3rd night at 2:31 a.m., I heard the latch. I didn't move. I let the camera record. I finished counting the drawer. I wiped down the counter. I waited until 3 o'clock before checking the footage on my phone. The video started at 2:30:58. The hallway was empty. At 2:31:12, the handle turned. The door opened about 8 inches. I leaned closer to my screen. Something stepped forward, not fully into the hallway, just halfway. A shoulder, part of a torso. It looked like a man wearing a dark shirt. He didn't rush, didn't look around. He stepped just far enough that his arm and half his chest were visible in the frame. Then he stopped. He stood there for 22 seconds, not moving, just occupying the doorway. Then he stepped backward. The door closed. I replayed it 3 times. The camera had clear resolution, no glitch, no distortion. I went down the hallway immediately and unlocked the stockroom. Empty. No footprints, no disturbed boxes, no second person. I checked the ceiling tiles. Solid. The next morning, I showed the footage to my manager. He watched it twice. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "I know. There's nowhere to stand behind that door." We both knew the layout. The shelving ran tight along that wall. There was less than a foot of clearance between the door and the first rack. No space for a person to stand flat against it. That night, I stayed later than usual, 2:28 a.m. The store felt heavier than before, quieter. Even the hum of the refrigerators seemed lower. At 2:32, the latch turned. I didn't look at the camera this time. I walked straight to the hallway. The door was already open, halfway, and someone was standing there, only halfway visible. A shoulder, a chest, the rest hidden by the door. He wasn't facing me directly, more angled toward the counter area, like he had been watching from inside. I stopped about 10 feet away. Neither of us moved. The fluorescent light flickered once overhead. I became aware of how narrow the hallway felt, how close the walls seemed. The air didn't feel warmer anymore. It felt contained. After maybe 15 seconds, he stepped backward. The door closed slowly. I waited another 10 before unlocking it. The stockroom was empty, exactly as it had been every other time. I quit 2 weeks later. I still drive past that station sometimes on my way home from my new job. Pump lights on, front windows glowing. Everything looks normal. But every time I pass, I think about the footage, not the part where he stepped out, the part where he stood there, because he never looked lost. He looked like he was checking something, and the space behind that door has never made sense to me since. It feels deeper than it should be, like the building has more room than the floor plan allows. And sometimes when I think about it too long, I can still hear that latch turning, slowly, from the inside. The cursor blinked in the center of the screen, a thin white line appearing and disappearing at a steady pace. The room was dark except for the monitor's glow and the small orange light on the modem by the wall. Each blink felt longer than the last, though I knew it wasn't. The rain outside tapped the window in uneven intervals, then paused, then returned, like it couldn't decide on a rhythm. I hadn't typed anything yet. I was waiting for the page to finish loading, watching the spinner reset itself over and over. The air in the apartment felt cooler than it should have, and one of my socks had slipped off without me noticing. My right heel rested against the floor, bare. The tile held the cold longer than carpet does. I thought about pulling the sock back on, then didn't. The page settled into place. Black background, gray text, no images, no links that tried to pull my attention elsewhere. The kind of design that felt deliberate in how little it offered. At the top was the forum's name, plain, forgettable. Below it, a list of threads with timestamps and usernames made of letters and numbers that didn't form words. I moved the mouse. The cursor slid smoothly. The computer fan hummed, steady and low. I'd come here out of curiosity. That was all. I wasn't looking for anything specific, and I wasn't expecting to stay long. I'd told myself I'd browse for a few minutes, close the browser, and go to bed. It was late enough that the building had gone quiet. No footsteps in the hallway, no voices through the walls, just the distant sound of traffic carried through wet air. I scrolled. Most thread titles were vague, bordering on meaningless. Observations, questions. Some tried too hard to sound important. I passed over those. Then I saw a title that didn't stand out at first because it didn't try to. It was simple. Something about routine notes. I hovered over it. The cursor rested there, unmoving. The timestamp said it had been posted 3 weeks earlier. That detail registered only because 3 weeks earlier I hadn't been anywhere like this. I clicked anyway. The thread opened instantly. No delay, just text. The first line described an apartment layout. Plain language, measurements, orientation, windows. I read it once, then again. My shoulders stayed relaxed. My breathing didn't change. Apartments share layouts. Words can fit more than one place. I kept reading. The next paragraph mentioned a desk against a wall, facing a window that looked out over a parking lot. It noted that the monitor was usually the only light on late at night. I glanced toward the window without turning my head. The parking lot lights reflected off wet pavement. I looked back at the screen. The post continued. It mentioned a chair that made a faint sound when leaned back. Not loud, just enough to notice. I leaned back slightly. The chair responded with the same small creak it always had. The sound felt too clear in the quiet room. I scrolled. The writing stayed consistent. Calm, observational. There were timestamps now. Morning, afternoon, night. Each followed by a short note. Someone leaving the apartment at roughly the same time on weekdays. Someone returning after dark. Lights turning on in a familiar sequence. Kitchen first, then the desk lamp, then the monitor. My mouth felt dry. I swallowed and adjusted my position, one foot tucked under the chair now. I told myself it was still coincidence. Patterns are easy to imagine when you're looking for them. The language didn't name anything. It didn't claim anything. Another scroll. There was a note about pausing at the door before leaving, as if checking for something forgotten. Keys, phone, wallet. My hand moved to my pocket on its own. Everything was there. Another line mentioned that the person inside sometimes worked late and removed one sock without realizing it, usually the right foot. I looked down. My right foot rested against the tile, bare. I noticed then that my jaw had tightened. I hadn't meant to clench it. I didn't stop reading. I read carefully, like someone reviewing a document they were responsible for. Each line landed quietly and stayed there. The details accumulated without urgency. The writer didn't rush. They didn't explain how they knew any of it. At the end of the post, there was a short sentence saying the notes would be updated if anything changed. Below it were replies. A few questioned the accuracy. One asked how the observations were made. Most said nothing at all. There was no response from the original poster. I scrolled back up and checked the date again. 3 weeks earlier. Before I'd installed the browser I was using now. I knew that because I'd only done that earlier that evening, after a conversation that had stuck with me longer than it should have. I glanced at the clock in the corner of the screen. More time had passed than I expected. The rain outside had picked up again, heavier now. I listened to it for a moment. The sound filled the space between thoughts. I moved the mouse toward the corner of the screen to close the tab. Halfway there, I stopped. It wasn't fear that stopped me. It was the sense that leaving would feel careless, like walking away from something unfinished. I scrolled back to the beginning and reread the first paragraph more slowly. Details I'd skimmed before stood out now. The building described as older, recently painted. The stairwell smelling faintly of cleaning solution in the mornings. The sound of a neighbor's television through the wall, always low, always late. All of it was accurate. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands resting together. The monitor's light reflected off the surface, highlighting small scratches I'd made over the years. My reflection was faint and distorted, barely there. I scrolled again, hoping to find something that broke the pattern, something wrong enough to dismiss the rest. But the notes stayed careful and precise. There was no judgment in them, no interest beyond attention. At the bottom of the thread was a line indicating the last update. The date was today. The time was less than an hour ago. I noticed then that I hadn't blinked in a while. When I did, the screen seemed brighter for a moment. The update was brief. It said the routine had shifted slightly, that the person inside had stayed in longer than usual that evening, that the rain had changed things, that the lights had come on later. I looked at the clock again. The timing matched. I hadn't written anything. I hadn't even moved much. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The keys felt cool. I considered typing something, then dismissed the idea. I didn't want to leave anything behind. I didn't want to make myself part of it. The cursor blinked in the reply box anyway. I scrolled up, then down again, as if the page might change if I looked away. It didn't. The content stayed exactly where it was. I leaned back and listened to the apartment. The computer's hum, the rain, a car passing somewhere below, tires hissing briefly on wet pavement, then quiet again. The heater clicked once and went still. I told myself that observation didn't require closeness, that routines could be guessed, that coincidence, however unlikely, still existed. I repeated these thoughts slowly, letting them settle. Without me touching anything, a new line appeared at the bottom of the thread. It was marked as an update. The timestamp was current. It noted that the person inside had leaned back in their chair, that scrolling had stopped, that they were sitting very still now, reading. I noticed my breathing then, shallow and measured. I didn't change it. Below the update, a small indicator appeared. Easy to miss. It showed that someone else was active in the thread. It showed that they were typing. If you enjoy slow, unsettling horror stories, consider liking the video and subscribing. Story 2. The cursor kept blinking at the end of the page, steady and patient, like it had all night. I hadn't typed anything. I was just watching it pulse in the dark, the white bar appearing and disappearing against the gray background of the forum. The room was quiet except for the low hum of my laptop fan and the distant sound of rain tapping the fire escape outside my window. The clock on my microwave said 12:41, but I didn't look at it again. I didn't want to measure how long I'd been sitting there. The thread hadn't updated in a while. No new replies, no typing indicators. Just the last confession sitting there, a block of text that ended too cleanly, like it had been cut off on purpose. Below it, the cursor waited, blinking, inviting me to add something. I didn't plan to. I rarely did. Mostly I read. The forum was simple. No avatars, no signatures, no likes. Just usernames made of numbers and letters, all temporary, all meant to disappear. People posted things they said they'd never told anyone. That was the appeal. It felt quieter than the rest of the internet, less performative. No arguing, no jokes, just statements, short paragraphs, sometimes long ones. Most of them written late at night, judging by the timestamps. I'd found the place weeks earlier, after one of those nights where sleep doesn't come and you keep scrolling, hoping to exhaust yourself. I didn't remember how I got there, and I didn't try too hard to retrace my steps. It was better that way. I didn't think of it as dangerous. Mostly it was boring. Regret, guilt, resentment. The same themes repeating, different details. I told myself that if anything, it made me feel less alone. That night, the page loaded a little slower than usual. The text appeared line by line, like it was being revealed instead of fetched. I noticed it only because my internet hadn't been acting up all day. The new post was near the top, marked with a timestamp from a few minutes earlier. The username was a string of characters I didn't recognize, which meant nothing. None of them were recognizable. I started reading without thinking. I always did. The first sentence made me pause, not because of what it said, but how it said it. The rhythm felt familiar. The sentence was plain, almost flat, but there was a slight hesitation built into it, a clause that doubled back on itself before moving forward. I reread it, slower this time, aware of the rain again, the way the room felt a little colder than earlier. I told myself it was coincidence. People write in similar ways all the time. There are only so many ways to say something honestly without dressing it up. I kept reading. The post wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. It unfolded carefully, one thought at a time, each sentence leaning on the last. The voice was restrained. No drama, no self-pity, just a description of something the writer had done years ago and never spoken about. A small thing, technically, nothing illegal, nothing that would make headlines. Just something quietly wrong, something that had sat with them, unchanged, while everything else in their life moved on. Halfway through, I stopped breathing for a moment. I noticed because I had to consciously inhale again, and the air felt cool in my throat. The confession wasn't just familiar in tone anymore. It was specific. Too specific. A detail appeared that narrowed the possibilities down to almost nothing. It mentioned a time, not a date, but a season. It mentioned a room layout that matched my old apartment exactly, down to the way the light came in from the side in the afternoon. It mentioned a choice I had made once, quickly, without fully understanding why, and then never revisited out loud. I scrolled back up and checked the username again, as if that would help. It didn't. I checked the timestamp. Recent. I looked at the browser tab, making sure I was where I thought I was. I was. My first thought was that someone had taken inspiration from another post. That happened sometimes. People echoed each other, consciously or not. But I knew this wasn't that. The phrasing was too close. Not just similar words, but the same pauses, the same way of qualifying statements, the same reluctance to name certain things directly. It sounded like me because it was me. Not literally, I told myself, but stylistically. Coincidentally, I felt a mild pressure behind my eyes, the kind that comes from staring at a screen too long. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the apartment. A car passed outside. Somewhere below, a door closed. I went back to the text. The last paragraph described the aftermath. Not consequences exactly, just the internal shift. The way the writer said they started noticing certain patterns afterward, how they became more cautious in some areas and careless in others. It described a habit I had developed without ever articulating it. A small, private adjustment I'd made to my routine that no one else would notice. I felt my stomach tighten, slow and controlled, like my body was reacting before my thoughts had caught up. I reminded myself that memory isn't as unique as we think it is. People overlap. Lives echo. Still, my hands had gone cold. I rubbed my palms together once, then stopped, aware of how loud the friction sounded in the quiet room. I read the post again from the beginning. This time, I paid attention to the sentence length, the punctuation, the way the writer avoided certain words, circled around them instead. I could almost predict where the commas would be before my eyes reached them. At the end of the confession, there was a single line separated from the rest by a blank space. I've never told anyone this, and I don't think I ever will. I stared at that line for a long time. The cursor blinked beneath it, steady as before. I hadn't told anyone. Not online, not in person, not in a journal, not drunk, not joking, not anonymously. The memory of it was something I'd sealed off so completely that even thinking about it felt like opening a door I'd nailed shut from the inside, I'd always assumed that made it safe, contained. I scrolled down to the comments. There were a few short responses, neutral, people thanking the poster for sharing, saying they understood. No one questioned the details. No one challenged it. No one said it sounded familiar. I hovered my cursor over the reply box. The blinking resumed, this time waiting for me. I didn't know what I would say. I didn't even know what I wanted to ask. Any direct question felt impossible. There was no way to phrase, "How do you know this about me?" without sounding unhinged, even to myself. I closed the laptop partway, then opened it again, as if changing the angle would change what was on the screen. The light from the display cast a pale rectangle on the wall, catching dust I hadn't noticed before. The rain had slowed outside, each drop spaced farther apart. I thought about the simplest explanation. Someone I knew had written it, someone I'd told without remembering. But I ran through the list in my head, carefully. There was no one. That was the point of the secret. It wasn't dramatic enough to confess, but it was personal enough to keep. It lived entirely in my head. Another explanation tried to surface, one that involved coincidence layered on coincidence, but it felt thin. I didn't push it away. I just let it sit there, unconvincing. I checked the rest of the form, clicking through other threads. Everything else looked the same as it always had. Different voices, different confessions. Nothing else matched. When I came back to the original post, it hadn't changed. No edits, no new comments. The username remained the same. I noticed then that the post had a view count. I hadn't paid attention to those before. This one was higher than average. I told myself that meant nothing. People were curious. Late-night readers like me drifting through. My reflection was faintly visible in the dark portion of the screen. I leaned closer without meaning to, then stopped. I didn't like the way it felt, the sense of mirroring. I pushed the laptop a few inches away. The clock now said 1:17. I was aware of time again, of how long I'd been sitting there. My legs felt stiff. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. The apartment felt unchanged, but I moved through it more deliberately, noticing the temperature difference between rooms, the way the floor creaked in the same places it always had. When I came back, the screen had gone dim. I tapped the trackpad and the page brightened again. For a split second before my eyes adjusted, I thought the text had shifted. It hadn't. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, except one thing. The cursor was no longer in the reply box. It blinked beneath a new line, one that hadn't been there before. A comment, fresh. The timestamp showed just now. I read it slowly. It was short, just a sentence. You remember the sound the radiator made that winter, right? I felt a tight, precise chill move through me. Not dramatic, just exact. The radiator in that old apartment had made a very specific noise when it kicked on, a rattling hum that I'd learned to distinguish from the others in the building. I'd never mentioned it in the confession. I'd never mentioned it anywhere. I scrolled up, checking the original post again, searching for any reference that could have led to this. There was none. The sentence sat alone, unelaborated, as if it didn't need to explain itself. I became aware then of a faint sound in my current apartment, a low metallic click as the heat turned on. It wasn't the same radiator. It didn't sound the same, but the timing felt deliberate in a way I couldn't justify. I didn't type a response. I didn't close the laptop. I just sat there, hands resting on the table, listening to the room settle, watching the screen. The cursor blinked beneath the comment, steady and patient, like it had been waiting for me longer than I'd realized. Story 3. The cursor stayed motionless near the bottom right of my screen, just above the pause icon. I noticed a faint delay in its movement, a hesitation that wasn't lag exactly, more like resistance. The video player had been open for several minutes, but nothing was playing yet. The loading circle turned once, stopped, then turned again. The room around me was quiet in the way apartments get after midnight, when even the building seems to settle into itself. The light from the laptop was cool against my hands. The air felt a little colder than it should have been for early spring. I waited longer than necessary before clicking anything. That had become a habit. When you spend enough time looking at unsettling things, you start giving them space, as if patience might blunt their effect. The title line above the player showed a date, tomorrow's date. That was new. The site usually lagged behind the world by years. Old cases, old disappearances, footage uploaded long after it stopped mattering to anyone official. I checked the date again in the corner of my screen. Still today. I told myself it was a formatting error. That happened sometimes. The cursor hovered again. The loading circle froze. When the image finally appeared, it took a second to understand what I was seeing, not because it was unclear, but because it was too ordinary. A room came into focus, dimly lit, the edges soft. The perspective was low, angled slightly upward. I recognized the pattern on the rug before anything else. A thin tear near the corner, something I'd meant to fix for months. The angle showed part of my couch, the side table beside it, and the window beyond. Rain streaked down the glass in slow lines, catching the glow from a streetlight outside. I didn't move. I didn't touch the trackpad. I watched the image the way you watch a reflection in water, waiting for it to ripple and prove it isn't what you think. The sound was minimal. A low, constant hum, like distant traffic softened by rain. Somewhere, a faint metallic rattle repeated at irregular intervals. I knew that sound. The heater in the unit below mine did that when it cycled on and off. The video time counter began to advance. I told myself there were thousands of apartments like this. Same layout, same cheap furniture, same city rain. But the longer I looked, the more specific it became. The small chip in the paint near the baseboard, the way the curtain on the left side sagged because the rod was loose. Even the faint reflection of the laptop's glow against the window matched the angle I was sitting at now. The perspective didn't change. Nothing dramatic happened. Time passed in the frame the same way it was passing for me, second by second. The room in the video stayed still. The rain outside the window shifted, sometimes heavier, sometimes lighter. The streetlight flickered once, briefly dimming the scene. I became aware of my own posture, how I was leaning forward without realizing it, how my shoulders felt tight, though nothing had happened yet. I checked the video length, 12 minutes total. The counter was just past 2. I thought about closing the laptop. The idea came and went without urgency. Curiosity felt heavier than fear at that point, pressing me into place. I watched as the light in the room shifted almost imperceptibly, like a cloud passing over the streetlight. The hum continued. The rattle returned, then stopped. At around 4 minutes, something changed, not in the room, but in my awareness of it. I noticed the distance between objects, the couch to the window, the side table to the wall, measurements I had internalized without ever needing to think about them. It felt like recognizing a place from memory while standing inside it. The timestamp in the corner of the video advanced toward the present. I checked the clock on my wall. The seconds were close. Not exact, but close enough to make me uncomfortable. I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on the screen. My chair made a soft scrape against the floor. In the video, the sound wasn't there. The room remained unchanged. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made the separation between us feel deliberate. I walked a few steps to the left, stopping near the edge of the rug. I stayed just outside the frame I could see on the screen, aware of where the camera, no, the point of view, must be positioned. Low, near the corner, somewhere I wouldn't normally place anything. The rain outside grew heavier. The sound on the video matched it, slightly delayed. I felt the temperature drop as the heater cycled off, the air cooling against my skin. A few seconds later, the same change registered in the video. By the time the counter reached 8 minutes, my thoughts had narrowed. I wasn't imagining explanations anymore. I was tracking alignment, the way the light shifted, the way the rain sounded, the way time itself seemed to be narrowing the gap between what I was seeing and where I was standing. The date above the video didn't change. At 10 minutes, the perspective adjusted slightly. Not a cut, just a subtle tilt, as if the device had settled into a new position. The frame now included the space where I was standing, the edge of the rug, the empty air above it. I didn't step back. I didn't step forward. I stood where I was, feeling the cool air against my hands, listening to the rain and the distant hum, both in the room and on the screen. The video continued to play. When it ended, there was no final moment, no clear marker. The image simply froze. The loading circle appeared again, turning once, then stopping. The date remained tomorrow. I closed the laptop after that, not because I felt done, but because there was nothing left to watch. The room around me looked the same as it always had. Ordinary, quiet, still. What stayed with me wasn't fear exactly. It was the certainty that the archive didn't predict anything. It didn't need to. It only recorded rooms when they were about to be empty. The locked church. I remember the sound first. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clearly a sound. Just the faintest shift of air from inside the sanctuary as I pulled the front doors closed behind me. The kind of pressure change you feel in your ears when a building settles for the night. I stood there for a second on the stone steps, keys in my hand, waiting to see if I'd imagined it. The parking lot was almost empty. One street lamp flickered near the road. It was late spring, but the temperature had dropped fast after sunset. The air felt cool against the sweat on the back of my neck. The youth group had run long, pizza boxes stacked in the fellowship hall, folding chairs left slightly out of line. I'd stayed to straighten everything. That was my job when I volunteered. Last one out, lock up. I checked every room. I'm methodical about it, always have been. I started in the classrooms, light switches off, thermostats set back, closet doors opened and closed again, just to be sure. Then the bathrooms. I physically pushed on each stall door, glanced behind them. Fellowship hall, empty. Kitchen, coffee pot unplugged, storage closet locked. The sanctuary was last. I walked the center aisle and looked under the pews out of habit. There's nowhere to hide in there anyway. It's an old church, small town, built in the 1920s. Hardwood floors that creak even when no one's walking on them. Stained glass along both sides, but at night it's just black panes. I turned off the chandelier lights from the back panel. The room dropped into a soft gray from the exit sign glow. Then I locked the main doors. Deadbolt, handle. I tested it twice. I remember thinking how quiet it felt once the door shut. Churches have a different kind of quiet when they're empty. Not silence exactly, more like the building holding its breath. I stepped off the front steps and headed toward my car. It was parked along the side lot near the hedge, gravel under my shoes. My key fob beeped when I unlocked it. The sound echoed more than it should have. That's when I looked up. The sanctuary lights were on. Not all of them, just the front half. A warm glow spilling through the tall windows near the pulpit. I stopped walking. For a few seconds, I tried to tell myself I'd forgotten something. Maybe I didn't flip the right switch. Maybe there's a secondary panel I missed. But I know the layout. I've been part of that church since I was a kid. I turned slowly toward the building. Through the center window, between two dark vertical lines of stained glass, I could see the front pews and the aisle, and someone standing near the third row. Still, facing the pulpit, the shape was clear, shoulders, head, arms at their sides, not moving. I didn't feel a rush of fear. It was more like a disconnect, like I was looking at a photo and trying to decide if it was edited. The sanctuary doors were locked. I had the only key. The pastor keeps a copy at home, and he'd left hours earlier. I'd watched him drive away. I took a few steps closer, staying on the edge of the lot. Gravel crunching under my shoes sounded too loud now. The figure didn't shift. I checked my phone out of reflex. 10:43 p.m. There aren't any side entrances, no basement access, no back door except the one that opens into the fellowship hall, and I'd locked that from inside before exiting through the front. I went back up the steps. My hands were steady when I unlocked the main doors again. The deadbolt turned smoothly. No resistance. No sign it had been disturbed. I opened the door just enough to step inside. The air felt warmer than it had a few minutes earlier. That was the first thing I noticed, like the heat had kicked back on. The sanctuary lights were fully on now. Not just the front half. Every chandelier lit. The pews were empty. The aisle was clear. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening. The building hummed faintly, old electrical wiring, the soft ticking of cooling metal somewhere above. I walked down the aisle slowly, scanning left and right. Nothing. No coats, no bags, no scuff marks on the floor. When I reached the third pew, I stopped where I'd seen the figure standing. The wood floor beneath me was smooth. No indentation. No sign anyone had been there. I turned in a slow circle. Everything looked exactly the way I'd left it, except for the lights. I walked to the back panel and checked the switches. They were all flipped up. I'm certain I'd turned them off. I stood there, staring at them, trying to remember the motion of my hand. I could picture it clearly. The click, the drop into dimness. I flipped them down again. The sanctuary went dark except for the exit signs. I waited. Nothing changed. I walked the entire building a second time. Every room, every closet, still empty. When I came back to the sanctuary, I stood at the back and looked towards the third pew again. The room felt smaller now. Not physically, just in the way sound carries differently when you're alone. I locked up a second time. Tested the handle twice again. When I stepped outside, I didn't go straight to my car. I stayed near the steps and watched the windows. They stayed dark. I told myself I'd missing something. Light reflection, a shadow from the street lamp. Maybe someone had been outside on the sidewalk and the glass distorted it. That explanation held for about 30 seconds. Then I realized something else. When I first saw the figure, it wasn't backlit. It wasn't a shadow. It was lit from above. I had seen the shape clearly against the pews. The overhead lights had already been on, which means they had turned on before I looked up, before I unlocked the doors again. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I came back early under the excuse of helping set up for Sunday service. I checked the locks again in daylight. No scratches, no damage, no loose hinges. I asked the pastor casually if anyone else had a key. He said no. I didn't tell him what I saw. I still volunteer there. I still lock up sometimes. But I don't walk to my car right away anymore. I stand at the edge of the lot and look back at the sanctuary windows. And every time I pay attention to the third pew, because I'm not afraid of someone breaking in. I'm afraid of seeing the lights already on. If you enjoy slow, unsettling horror stories, consider liking the video and subscribing. The confession booth. The vacuum made a low, steady hum against the carpet, but it kept dipping in volume every few seconds like something was pressing lightly against the hose. At first, I thought the bag was full. I shut it off, and the silence filled the chapel immediately. The kind of thick, padded silence you only get in large buildings after hours. The stained glass windows were black from the outside. The only light came from the wall sconces spaced evenly along the aisle, dim and yellow. I stood there beside the confession booth, one hand still on the handle of the vacuum, listening. There was a faint rustle, not from the room, from inside the booth. It sounded like fabric shifting against wood. I waited a few seconds, expecting a follow-up sound, a cough, a door latch, anything that would turn it into something ordinary. Nothing came. I leaned down and tapped the vacuum with my knuckles, like that might explain it. The motor had been running hard for the last hour. Maybe it had rattled the thin wood panels of the booth. That made sense. The confession booth was old, dark oak, polished smooth by decades of use. 2 narrow doors, one for the priest, one for the person confessing. Both latched from the inside during use. On Saturdays, I cleaned the church alone. The priest left around 6. By 7:30, the building was empty except for me. I checked the front doors myself every week. I glanced at my phone. 8:12 p.m. The church felt larger at night. The ceilings seemed higher, the air cooler. The smell of furniture polish and old hymnals lingered close to the floor. I rolled the vacuum back toward the center aisle and switched it on again. The hum returned. When I reached the edge of the confession booth, I heard it. Michael. It was quiet, almost threaded into the vacuum noise. Soft enough that if I'd been wearing earbuds, I might have missed it. But I wasn't. I shut the vacuum off again. Silence pressed in. I stared at the closed door of the booth. The whisper hadn't sounded distant. It hadn't echoed the way voices usually do in that room. It sounded contained, close to wood. I walked around to the priest's side first. The door was closed. There's a small brass handle on the outside. It doesn't lock from that side during off hours, only from inside when in use. I turned the handle gently. It didn't move. Locked. That made me pause. The priest always leaves the doors slightly ajar after Saturday confessions. I've seen it dozens of times. It helps air it out. I tried the other door. Locked too. I stood there, staring at the narrow wooden panels, trying to recall if maybe he'd changed routine recently. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. The building was completely still. No footsteps, no air vents running. Even the refrigerator in the parish hall had gone quiet. I knocked lightly on the priest's door. "Father?" My voice sounded smaller than usual. No answer. I waited long enough to feel foolish, then softer than before. "Michael." It came from the other side of the thin divider inside the booth, the side where the penitent sits, not the priest's compartment. My name again. Calm, not strained, not urgent, just spoken like someone making sure I could hear it. I stepped back. The wood of the booth looked solid. No cracks, no visible gaps except the small screened partition inside, which I couldn't see from where I stood. The doors were still locked. I crouched down slightly and pressed my ear near the seam where the penitent door met the frame. Nothing. No breathing. No shifting. I stood up slowly and walked toward the light switch panel along the wall. For a second, I considered turning all the lights off and seeing if someone inside reacted. Instead, I called out again, "Is someone in there?" The question felt strange the moment I said it. If someone had stayed behind accidentally, they would have answered already. If someone had broken in, they wouldn't whisper my name. The temperature felt cooler near the booth. Not dramatically, just a small difference, like standing near a drafty window. I placed my palm flat against the penitent door. The wood was cold. Not room temperature. Cold enough that I noticed. I pulled my hand back. "Michael." This time it came from the priest's side. I know that because the sound shifted. It wasn't behind the same panel. It was as if someone had leaned closer to the interior divider and spoken through the screen. The voice wasn't distorted. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. Not someone I recognized exactly, just familiar. That bothered me more than anything. I stepped back another pace. I considered getting my phone out to record it, but something about that felt performative. like admitting this was happening. Instead, I walked briskly down the aisle toward the front entrance and checked the doors. Locked, deadbolt secure, no movement outside through the glass. When I came back to the confession booth, I moved slower. I crouched again and looked carefully at the bottom of the penitent door. There was a small gap between the door and the floor, less than half an inch. No light came through from inside, which meant the interior light wasn't on. If someone were sitting in there, they'd be in darkness. I reached out and tried the priest's handle again, still locked. There's no exterior key for those doors, only a small latch inside each compartment. The priest is the only one who uses it during confession. I straightened up. "I'm going to get the pastor," I said out loud, though I knew he was gone. Silence answered me. I stood there another full minute. Nothing. No whisper. No movement. Eventually, I finished vacuuming the rest of the sanctuary. I avoided the booth entirely. I left it for last. When I came back to it near 9, I decided to try one more time. I grabbed the priest's handle and turned it firmly. It opened, smoothly. No resistance. The interior compartment was empty. Chair in place. Bible on the small shelf. Kneeler untouched. I stepped inside and checked the latch. It wasn't engaged. I moved to the other side and opened the penitent door. Also unlocked. Empty. The air inside both compartments felt normal now. Room temperature. I stood in the narrow priest's side for a moment and looked at the small screen that separates the two seats. The mesh was dark. Still, I haven't told anyone about it. Every Saturday since then, I clean the same areas in the same order. The confession booth is always unlocked when I arrive now, but I don't vacuum near it with the lights off anymore. And I don't say my own name inside the sanctuary because I'm not completely sure the voice was calling to get my attention. It sounded more like it was checking if I was still there. The church camera footage. The first motion alert came at 2:07 a.m. It wasn't unusual by itself. The system was old, sensitive. Moths sometimes triggered it if they got inside the vestibule. Heat fluctuations could do it too. What made me pause was the location. Sanctuary, center aisle. I was sitting in the small security office just off the fellowship hall. The room smelled faintly like dust and burnt coffee. A single desk lamp lit the keyboard and the monitor wall. The rest of the church was dark. I clicked into the live feed. The sanctuary looked exactly the way I'd left it 20 minutes earlier. Long rows of pews, center aisle stretching toward the pulpit, exit signs glowing dim red at the back. No movement. I leaned closer to the screen. The timestamp in the corner blinked steadily. 2:07:34 a.m., 2:07:35. Nothing shifted. I muted the alert and waited another 30 seconds. Still empty. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and walked down the hallway toward the main doors. The building always felt larger at that hour, the air cooler, the hum of old wiring louder once you noticed it. When I pushed open the sanctuary doors, the hinges gave a low, familiar creak. My flashlight beam ran down the aisle. Empty. The temperature felt even. No drafts, no open windows. I walked the full length of the room, sweeping the light under pews, across the altar steps, along the side walls. Nothing. I stood in the exact center of the aisle where the alert had marked movement. Silence. Just the faint ticking of something contracting in the ceiling. I went back to the office and logged the alert as a false trigger. At 2:19 a.m., it happened again. Sanctuary, center aisle. This time, I didn't rush. I pulled up the playback instead of the live view. The recording rolled back 10 seconds before the alert. The room sat still, unchanged. Then, at exactly 2:18:57, the motion box appeared on screen, a faint digital outline highlighting the center aisle, but I couldn't see what it was outlining. There was no visible shape, no shadow crossing, just the box flickering as if something had passed through. I replayed it twice. Same result. I went down again, slower this time. When I stepped into the sanctuary, I didn't turn on my flashlight right away. I let my eyes adjust to the ambient glow of the exit signs. The aisle stretched out in a low red haze. I stood there for a full minute without moving. Nothing moved back. When I did sweep the light forward, it revealed the same still room. But I noticed something small. The third pew on the left, the aisle side Bible, was slightly angled. Not dramatically, just not perfectly parallel to the seat like the others. I walked over and straightened it. I told myself I might have brushed it earlier during my first check. I finished the sweep and went back to the office. At 2:43 a.m., another alert. Same location. This time, I didn't even stand up. I watched the live feed. The motion box flickered again over the center aisle. The pews were empty, but something felt off. I couldn't tell what at first. Then I saw it. In the camera feed, the third pew on the left, the Bible was angled again, exactly the way it had been before I straightened it. I froze. I knew I'd fixed it. I remember pressing it flush with the seat edge. I pulled up the feed from 5 minutes earlier. In that footage, after I'd returned to the office, the Bible was straight. In the current live view, it was angled. I looked at the timestamp, 2:43:12 a.m. I stood up slowly and walked back to the sanctuary. This time, I kept my eyes on the pew before I even crossed the threshold. From the doorway, I could see the third pew clearly. The Bible was straight, perfectly aligned. I didn't move for several seconds. Then I stepped inside, still straight. I walked down the aisle, my shoes making soft contact with the wood floor. When I reached the pew, I placed my hand lightly on the book. It hadn't been moved. I turned around and looked toward the security camera mounted high in the back corner. Small red indicator light blinking steadily. Recording. I went back to the office without adjusting anything. I didn't want to touch it again. At 3:02 a.m., the alert came back. Sanctuary, center aisle. I didn't check live this time. I went straight to playback. The camera view showed the sanctuary, empty as before. The motion box flickered over the aisle. And then I saw it. The third pew on the left was missing. Not broken, not damaged, just not there. In the recording, the aisle stretched one pew length farther before the next row began. Everything else was the same. Same lighting, same pulpit, same exit signs. But the spacing was wrong. I stared at it long enough to feel my eyes strain. I rewound. On earlier footage, the pew was present. On the newest clip, it wasn't. I stood up immediately and walked back to the sanctuary. When I opened the doors, the room looked exactly as it always had. All pews in place, including the third one. I walked down and counted. 1, 2, 3. It was there, solid under my hand. I looked toward the camera in the corner again, then back at the aisle. I tried to picture the version I'd just seen on the screen. The gap, the extended stretch of floor, it didn't match what I was standing in. I returned to the office slowly. When I replayed the clip again, the pew was back, exactly where it belonged. No gap, no missing row. The motion box still flickered, but the room looked normal. I sat there until my shift ended at 5. No more alerts came. I didn't file a report. I didn't mention it to the church board. The system hasn't been replaced yet. Sometimes, around 2 in the morning, the motion alert still triggers in the center aisle. I don't always check it now, because I realized something during those nights. The camera isn't glitching. It's recording something accurately. It's just not always recording the same room I'm standing in, and I don't know which version is the correct one.